collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, we continue our conversation with the former Palestine National Authority's Minister of Information, Nabeel Shaath.
The Israelis actually created all the conditions to cut Gaza out. They withdrew from Gaza and totally encircled it from the sea, from the land, and from the air, and therefore cut physically all its relationship with the West Bank. And that led to Hamas taking over.
And we meet musician and author Gilad Atzmon, who has studied and written books about Jewish identity.
Now, if Israel is a problem because it is a racist country, so you would expect its dissenters, Jewish dissenters, to be anti-racist, and devastatingly enough, there are actually more racists than Israel.
On last week's programme, we had a conversation with the former Palestine National Authority's Minister of Information, Nabeel Shaath. I was only able to play you half of the chat that we had during his recent official visit to Cyprus. So let's hear now the rest of the conversation. Can I ask you about whether or not your thoughts on the two-state solution have changed if you look now at the map, the walls, and the whole way that the geography of the West Bank has changed?
Well, I understand that that's exactly what the Israelis want. They want us to give up. And maybe to leave our country to them. Already half the Palestinian people have been forced to immigrate out of Palestine. We are now 14 million people, the Palestinians. 7 million of us are either in refugee camps in the Arab world around us, or in Europe and America and Latin America and Australia as immigrants. But we have not given up.
But you're still with a two-state solution, or do you think that a one-state solution in a sort of confederation, much like Cyprus is negotiating now, could actually be the answer?
My choice was always a one-state solution. We had to take the two-state solution when the Israelis and the Americans totally rejected a one-state solution. I wrote in 1969 a series of articles about a non-sectarian, secular, democratic state for the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims in the whole of Palestine. But there was absolutely no Israeli that accepted it, by the way. They wanted their own state. Okay, so we had to eventually go to accept a two-state solution. But the real solution is a one-state solution. Why not have in Palestine and Israel just one state, just like the United States, or just like Australia, or just like what South Africa has become today, a tolerant, secular, progressive, democratic state for all its people? Of course I would go to that. But who wants it? The Israelis don't.
To the Palestinians, because the last question I want to ask you is about the divisions within Palestinian politics. You represent Fatah, and of course everybody's heard of Hamas. Now, I think it was back in 2014, there was an agreement, there was a unity government, and it was praised by almost every large country that could still put pressure on Israel. What happened? What changed that it seems once again that there is not a unified Palestinian approach, and that also undermines the efforts of the Palestinian people?
I agree with you on the conclusion, no doubt. I think we have to get out of this disunity and bring back unity, as much as you in Cyprus really need to do that yourselves. And in the two cases, there are other parties that make it difficult. In your case and in our case. The Israelis actually created all the conditions to cut Gaza out. They withdrew from Gaza and totally encircled it from the sea, from the land, and from the air, and therefore cut physically all its relationship with the West Bank. And that led to Hamas taking over Gaza and separating Gaza from the West Bank. Now the question is, how do you reunite them?
Especially since they are physically separated.
Yeah, very much so. We have really been negotiating for a long time. And one obstacle after another have really vanished. At one time, we differed on political ideology, on political strategy, on so many things. Today, they agree that the need is to build an independent Palestinian state on the West Bank and Gaza, and not only liberate all of Palestine, as they used to say. Now they agree on elections to elect a unity government.
How can you, as part of the, let's say, official Palestinian voice recognised by all the governments we've been talking about, persuade those governments that Hamas was actually elected by the people of Gaza and should be taken off that terrorist list?
The Europeans are really accept that. I mean, all of Europe will accept our unity, which will allow Hamas to be legitimized and to run into any election. But the United States and Israel, of course, still say no. Now, we don't care if they say no or not. The question is how to convince our brothers in Hamas to come to joint elections in the West Bank and Gaza and give up an independent entity in Gaza. And as I said before, at one time they posited many arguments about the difference in our strategy, in our ideology. They want an Islamist state and all of that. Today, these things have vanished. Today, the only problem left for us to agree on unity is what to do with the employees that Hamas hired, whether military employees or civilian employees. They want the Palestinian new government to accept all of them in the civil service of the new government. And now they're talking about 70,000, which will more than double the number of total employees we have today. So the problem now is really economic, financial.
But do you still have what you could call a unity government? Because since that sort of handshaking and unity in 2014, we've heard nothing more about that.
No, there is what is called now a unity government. But that unity government does not really have much power in Gaza. Hamas is still running things the way they want to, but using support from that unity government for education, for the power station, for the purchase of electricity and water. All of this is done now by the government in the West Bank. But the government in the West Bank does not really have much control of Gaza. And if there will be real unity between Gaza and the West Bank, then we have to go to elections. And
but it's also, as I said, so difficult when there's a physical separation. Here in Cyprus, we can walk over to the north. The Turkish Cypriots can come over to the south. We can mix, we can mingle, we can discuss. Is that something that, if you could achieve, you feel would move things forward?
When we signed the Oslo Agreement, a very important part of it was building a safe road between Gaza and the West Bank. The Israelis never allowed it to be built, or even to use their own roads to do it. But they allowed us, if we get a permission from the Israeli military, to travel from Gaza to the West Bank via Israeli roads and back. So today we don't have a safe passage, and that really makes things more difficult. There are problems between the Hamas and Egypt today, which is blocking the road between Gaza and Egypt. We used to go to Egypt and from Egypt to Gaza to avoid going through Israel. But today that is also a problem. The Gazans are suffering.
The last time I spoke to Ioannis Kassoulidis, I think, about the situation in Palestine, he was talking about the possibility of Cyprus somehow being involved in guaranteeing a port facility. And I know it's something that in Gaza they desperately need, don't they?
There are two projects here being discussed. One, which was really a project I supported, 6 years ago actually, is to rent 2 piers in the Limassol port and have an international inspection unit there. So boats going to Gaza will come to Cyprus first, they will be searched, and then they will be escorted to Gaza, which the Israelis cannot object that they will be carrying any explosives or anything like that. And then now there is a Turkish project to build a Gaza port managed by the Turks. You see, again, your problem now is translating itself also to our problem. We really, we don't mind either, but the question is, we don't want an independent fort of Gaza to reincarnate and to deepen the disunity. We want it to remain as an incentive for unity. That is, if you unite, we will build a port. But until we build it, we will rent a port from the Cypriots. So that can happen only if Hamas really feels it has become that close to making unity, that this will be the icing on the pudding or the icing on the cake. That if you go to unity, that will bring to Gaza a port.
But then the other argument might be that bringing a port to Gaza would have such a huge impact on the economy that life would be so much better for the people of Gaza that they wouldn't be looking to hardliners in Hamas the way they do now.
Well, I will just shift that argument a little bit by saying, whatever the situation is, we care about our people in Gaza and we would want to give them a decent life with whatever. But we think that that decent life will be so much more possible if we unite. That is, if we remain disunited and they have their ports which encourage Hamas to continue the disunity, that might delay the day. I am optimistic enough to think, like what I heard from President Anastasiadis today, he thinks that maybe you are so close to unity in Cyprus that it might even happen before the end of the year. I think that is the same, this is my feeling about Gaza and the West Bank, that we may be able to find a solution before the end of this year. And therefore, the port and the rented piers will be the icing on the cake.
Let's certainly hope so. That's a forward-looking Nabeel Shaath, former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Information for the Palestinian National Authority, and now the Fatah Foreign Commissioner. And he's joined us on the Cyprus News Digest. Let's hope that 2016 does indeed prove to be the year when we see peace in our region.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
Gilad Atzmon is a British jazz artist and he's an author. He's very well known here in Cyprus to fans of the jazz genre because he regularly visits and performs all over the island. He's also given a seminar while he was here this time. Gilad, you come here how many times a year? Because you've got a huge fan base in Cyprus.
Yeah, I think that people like me here, but this year I came 3 months ago, and we're going to make it a regular thing now. I think that the jazz playing, the level of musicianship in this island improved a lot in the last 10 years. Some great musicians came back from Berkeley and some other schools in Europe, and they're doing a great job, and I have a lot of good people to play with, so it's a lot of fun.
You've been called one of the hardest gigging jazz musicians on the planet, and that means, I presume, that you play with lots of different people in many different countries.
I like to travel. A lot of people think that I'm extremely clever, but I think that the fact that I come with some interesting ideas has a lot to do with the fact that I'm traveling a lot, and I meet very interesting people, and I see things from many different perspectives.
And your perspective, if we come on to politics, particularly on the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, is very different from certainly many Israelis. You were born, I think, in Israel.
Yeah.
But what do you make of the current situation in that conflict, which I always think of as a suppurating, festering sore that is actually probably the reason for so much conflict in the whole of the Middle East?
I think that in the whole of the world, actually, at the moment, for me, Israel is a problem. It is a very big problem, but it is just a symptom of a far greater problem, which I define as Jewish politics or Jewish identity politics. We can see what is happening in Israel and Palestine. Palestine is Israel. We can see what is happening in Syria, what is happening in Iraq. We know very well that it was Jewish lobbies around the world that pushed for the war in Iraq. We know that it was Jewish lobbies in America, in France, in Britain that pushed for intervention in Syria at the time. And I believe that if we want to see a prospect of peace, to start to think in peaceful terms again, we have to identify those who are pushing us into more and more conflicts. And I see Jewish politics, global Jewish politics, at the heart of it. Now, you want me to talk about the situation in Palestine? This is quite devastating, but we have to look at it in proper historical perspectives. The Zionist movement that was established in the late 19th century, to be precise, 1897, the first Zionist Congress in Basel, was largely an anti-Semitic movement. They were very upset when they look in the mirror. They didn't like the Jew. They didn't like the Jew being at the center of banking and capitalism and lobbying. And they said, we have a problem. The diaspora Jew is a problem, but it's not his or her fault. It is because these people are detached from their land. For them, Zion, i.e. Palestine, was the Jewish land. And they said, once we engage in a process of homecoming, what they regarded as their home, I don't think that they have anything to do with this part of the world. Once we engage in homecoming, this will change. We'll see a new Jew. And by the way, I am kind of a product of that process. Half of my family, my mother's family, they came to the region as Zionists and in the 30s. The other side of my family been there from the 19th century. They are basically Palestinian Jews.
That's very interesting, because if you go back to the 19th century or before, the whole area was a total mix of Christians, Muslims,
For
Jews.
sure.
They were all... I hesitate to put a label. You can't call them Palestinians or Jews or anybody else. They were just the people of the region.
Palestinians. They were Palestinians. Both my parents have a Palestinian birth certificate. You are totally right. And my grandfather, father's side, spoke Arabic like an Arab. But the issue here is that I go back to this topic, the Zionism. Zionism promised to change the Jew, to civilize. They really spoke about civilizing the Jew, make the Jew into an authentic human being that is connected to the soil, that engages in agriculture, and so on and so on. And here we are, 60, 70, 80 years down the road. To a certain extent, some people can count as many as 100 or even 120 if you want to start in 1897. And the Jews are back in the ghetto. They surrounded themselves with humongous ghetto walls. They are detached from the land. The agriculture is gone. The industry is gone. Israel is basically a place where Jewish oligarchs all over the world can hide their dirty money. It is an awful place. And I think that it's not a coincidence, because even the radical Zionists themselves couldn't bring a change, because the people that were supposed to be schlepped, to be moved, to be transferred into the Middle East were the Jews, and they brought those symptoms with them.
Do you go back to Israel?
Never.
When were you last there?
Probably 95 or 96, so it's like 20 or 21, 22 years.
Because a lot of people would say to you, I'm being devil's advocate here, that if you don't go back, and I presume you have family there, visit your family, meet the people who are there and so on, and discuss with them, how do you really know what the feeling is in Israel? Because what we're seeing, particularly under the present government, is very clear policies, and we all know what they are. But how do the people of Israel feel? Are they supportive of this? Because the biggest dissenting voices seem to me to be coming from Jews in the diaspora, the Jewish Voice for Peace, for people in the
I'm
UK
not very
and so
impressed.
on.
I'm not very impressed with all those Jewish dissidents. I think that they are part. They're not just part of the problem. They may as well be the core of the problem. What all those Jewish organizations managed to do along the years is to become more and more dominant within the solidarity movement. They cleansed this movement of any intellectuals that were willing to touch the real problems. For them, the battle for Palestine is primarily a battle against anti-Semitism, as if they have anything to do with Semitism. But I'll address your earlier question. You're right, I'm not going to Israel. I obviously don't conduct interviews with Israelis. I monitor Israeli press in Hebrew on a daily basis, and I'm one of the very few people who are doing it and reporting the thing that the Israelis don't report in their English Asbara press. You know, you have Haaretz in Hebrew that comes with one story, and Haaretz in English that comes with a slightly different story. The same applies to Ynet and all their media outlets. There is a point in what you're saying here, a few weeks ago, a very interesting statistics came out, and it suggested that Israel is among the worst place on the planet in terms of social equality. So the gap between rich and poor is humongous. It was the third from the bottom of developed countries. The same poll suggested that in spite of that, the Israelis are amongst the happiest people on the planet. So they are happy to be abused. Now, this actually supports what I just said 5 minutes ago about the ghetto mentality. The Jews were very, very happy in the ghetto, and in fact, one of the early Zionists, Nordo, said exactly that. We were happy in the ghetto. We are not happy with this emancipation, with the idea that we can become people like all other people in France and in Britain. We like these insular conditions, and they definitely managed to erect the ghetto once again. It is a dangerous ghetto. Now, go forward to JVP, to all those Jewish organizations. I don't know if whether you are a Jew or not, but let's assume that you are not. If you're not a Jew, you can definitely subscribe to JVP. You can donate to JVP. They will be very happy to take your money. However, there is one thing that you will never be. You will never be the secretary of JVP. And the reason is quite devastating. You are not racially qualified. You are not a Jew. Now, if Israel is a problem because it is a racist country, so you would expect its dissenters, Jewish dissenters, to be anti-racist, and devastatingly enough, there are actually more racists than Israel, because in Israel, the third party in the parliament is an Arab party, while in JVP board, we don't find any Goyim or Gentiles, whatever you want to call it, in any decision-making position. So it's a tribal operation, and it's actually identical with Israel. The fact that the dissent to Israel is dominated by those kind of people definitely explains why nothing good happened in Palestine and why the solidarity movement failed for so many years.
Gilad Atzmon, and you can hear the rest of my long conversation with him on the next edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's programme. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if possible, that you'll join me for the next edition. A reminder that if you'd like to get in touch, you can email cyprusnewsdigest@gmail.com. This is Rosie Charalambous saying many thanks for your company. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.